Let's talk about Tyrannosaurus rex. We all know it was huge, right? A total monster. But have you ever stopped to think about how it got that big? I mean, how does an animal we've never ever seen alive go from a tiny hatchling to a 7-ton apex predator? Well, we're going to dive into that because this is a story about some serious scientific detective work. And it turns out the answers we thought we had for years were just the beginning of a way bigger mystery. So we've got the fossils, these amazing clues left in stone, millions of years old. But a bone is just, well, it's just a bone. To really understand a dinosaur's life, scientists have to become forensic investigators. They have to piece together a whole life story using only this ancient evidence. So the real question is, how do you get a bone to tell you its secrets? All right, so the first major breakthrough in this whole investigation was figuring out how to make the bones talk. And the first thing they told us was how to tell time. This one technique totally changed the game. The secret is something called lines of arrested growth, or LAGs for short. And you already know how this works, basically. Think about tree rings, right? A tree adds a new ring for every year it's alive. Well, it turns out dinosaurs did pretty much the same thing, but inside their bones. These tiny, microscopic lines show when their growth slowed down, probably once a year. So if you slice open a fossil and count the rings, you can figure out how old that dinosaur was when it died. Pretty cool, huh? And once you can tell age, a whole process just clicks into place. First, you count the rings to get the age. Simple enough. Second, you measure a big, sturdy bone, like the femur, the thigh bone, and you use some well-established formulas to estimate how much the whole animal weighed. Then, you do this for every fossil of that species you can get your hands on, plot their age and their weight on a chart, and you start to connect the dots. What you get is a growth curve, a timeline of that species' entire life. So, when scientists started doing this, the results they got were honestly, they were spectacular. The story these bones told was one that grabbed headlines and completely shaped how we imagine dinosaurs. The data all seemed to point to the same thing. Dinosaurs didn't just grow slow and steady. Nope. They had a crazy, explosive teenage growth spurt. For a few years, they would just balloon in size, packing on weight at a rate that's almost hard to wrap your head around. Kind of like us, but on a totally different scale. And for T-Rex, there was one number that became legendary, 767 kilograms a year. Now, to put that in perspective for you, that's like adding an entire adult grizzly bear to your body weight every single year for your whole teenage phase. This number was everywhere, and for a long time, it was just accepted as fact. This is how the Tyrant King got so big. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This is where our detective story takes a really sharp turn. Because it turns out, the case wasn't closed. A new investigator came along, decided to double-check the math, and what they found threw everything into chaos. And this is what's so important to remember about science. It's not about finding one answer and then calling it a day. The whole point is to constantly test everything. Every conclusion is just waiting for someone to come along, look at the evidence with fresh eyes, and ask, hey, does this story still hold up? And in 2013, that's exactly what a researcher named Nathan Meyervold did. He went back to those original studies, used their exact same data, their exact same methods, and tried to get the same results. And he couldn't. He stated it very clearly in his paper. The original results just weren't repeatable. The math, it just didn't add up. And when I say the math didn't add up, I mean it was off by an insane amount. Like, it's almost funny. For Gorgosaurus, the original study claimed a peak growth of 117 kilograms a year. Meyervold reran their numbers and got over 39,000 kilograms a year. For Mazospondylus, it jumped from 35 to over 223,000. These weren't just little rounding errors. This was a sign that something was fundamentally broken with the whole analysis. So what on earth went wrong? How could the numbers be that far off? Well, the investigation turned from the spreadsheets back to the fossils themselves. Because the problem wasn't just in the calculations. It was in the clues they were working with from the start. This chart right here, this is the smoking gun. For a lot of these famous dinosaurs, we've never actually found a fully grown adult. Take Tyrannosaurus, the biggest one ever found. Sue is thought to be about 99% of its full potential size. That's actually really good. But look at Apatosaurus. The biggest one we have is maybe only 37% of what we think its full size was. The hard truth is, for many species, our entire fossil record is just teenagers. Think about it this way. It's like trying to predict a person's adult height and weight by only looking at a picture of them as a 5-year-old. You just can't do it. Any number you come up with is just a complete and total guess. You're trying to finish a story when you only have the first few chapters. So this whole explosive growth spurt idea was built on some really shaky assumptions. First, scientists assumed all dinosaurs grew in this perfect, tidy S shape. Slow at first, then super fast, then slow again. They assumed we had enough fossils of babies, teens, and adults to actually see that full curve. And they assumed the specific mathematical models they were using were the right tool for the job. And it turns out all of those assumptions were pretty questionable. So, if the old story is wrong, where does that leave us now? What's the new verdict on how dinosaurs grew? Well, like any good detective story, the truth is a lot more complicated, and this mystery is far from solved. Let's circle back to our star player, T-Rex. The old number was famously 767 kilograms a year. Well, the reanalysis, using much more careful methods, puts the peak growth rate closer to 365 kilograms per year. Now, don't get me wrong, that is still incredibly fast, but it is less than half of what we all thought for so long. And that's really the big takeaway here. The reinvestigation didn't just find a single mistake. It revealed that the real picture is just messy. Some of the old growth rates were way too high, some were actually too low. And for a whole lot of dinosaur species, we have to be honest and admit we simply don't have enough fossils to say anything for sure. But the story doesn't end there. It actually ends with a brand new fascinating clue. While reanalyzing the fossils of Allosaurus, Meyerhold found that the data points didn't fit on one single growth curve. They fit perfectly onto two different curves. It looked like there were two separate groups, living side by side, but growing at totally different rates. The most likely explanation? It wasn't one species, it was two. One of which might be totally new to science, spotted not by the shape of its bones, but by the story of how it grew. And that just leaves you wondering, what other secrets are still hiding in those rings?